They've been represented by Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much.
3 minutes.
Taoiseach, last week here in the Dáil, I asked you to be the Taoiseach for our farming community, be they beef producers, be they producers of lamb, and people who are struggling, trying to make a living for themselves and trying to better themselves and their families. This week, I want to highlight the situation with regard to the conflicting regulations between EU and Ireland, which leaves fishermen in Ireland in a detrimental position. I want to highlight the following of what has happened to fishermen who are working in hard and tough conditions with perhaps a small boat, give a bit of employment for themselves, maybe a family member and a few friends in a locality. People who had quotas of 119 tonne, seeing their tonnage being brought down to 24 tonne. People with a bigger boat, 310 tonne, going down to 70 tonne. You could imagine the impact that this is going to have on people having to go as far away maybe as Scotland or down to Spain, trying to get a catch, to land them, working in very tough conditions, the high cost of fuel, and seeing their tonnage being reduced dramatically like this. It is going to mean the difference between being able to stay in business and not stay in business. It is not as though they were making a lot of money. As you know, these boats come at a very expensive cost. They have to pay good wages. They have all the other expenses that are involved, plus the amount of time that they can't fish because of bad weather. And when they're stopped and when they can't claim any type of assistance, they don't want assistance. They want to go out, they want to catch, and they want to sell their fish and make their week's pay. That's all they want. But unfortunately, many of them are being put out of business. In December 2017, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine introduced pilot quota balancing to come into effect on the 1st of January 2018. This scheme introduced penalties to fishermen if they brought in fish in excess of their allocated quota. Not only would the excess be deducted from their quota, but a multiplying factor is used to penalise even further. Under EU regulations, no disregarding is allowed, but under the new quota balancing introduced, the only way to land exactly the quota allocated is to disregard the excess fish at sea. Fishermen agree that in order to preserve fish stocks, measures need to be taken. Quota balancing is necessary, but the scheme needs to be amended. And what I would be saying to you here today, Taoiseach, I'd be asking you, as I did last week, in reminding you that you're a Taoiseach not just for Dublin County or Dublin City, you're a Taoiseach for every part of this country, including our farming and our fishing communities. And I believe these sectors work so hard, as do all the other people in other sectors of life, but they're trying to create employment for themselves, and this is definitely going to put an awful lot of them out of business, and I'd like for you to address this very tough times that they're facing.
Taoiseach, 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Well, first of all, I want to assure you that the Government is very committed to the fishing industry, particularly at this time in the context of the threats that they face as a result of Brexit. And when we're dealing with Brexit, and I think must be 30–40% of government time is now taken up by Brexit, at the forefront of my mind and at the forefront of the mind of this government are our farmers and our fishermen and our agri-food industry, because those are the industries that are most likely to be adversely affected by Brexit and by the rural economies associated with them. And that's one of the reasons why we're putting so much work into this, because we want to protect the livelihoods of our farmers, our fishermen, our agri-food industry and everyone who depends on it. And that's why we're working so hard to secure a deal, and a deal that means that there will be no tariffs or quotas imposed on our farming exports. And the entire industry can be assured that the government has their back in that regard. The same thing applies on CAP reform and also in our efforts to make sure that no agreement is made on Mercosur that adversely affects our beef industry in particular. In terms of our commitment to the fishing sector, this, I believe, is reflected most recently in the negotiations on our recent fisheries quota, where Minister Creed secured €230 million worth of quota for the industry this year. This maintains quotas at 2018 levels, but represents an increase in value terms. For fishermen operating outside of Castletownbere, this included large increases in the number of stocks of importance for the south and southwestern ports, which I know the Deputy has a particular interest in, such as haddock up 20%, hake up 28%, megrams up 47%, all from the Celtic Sea. We're also proceeding with a very significant capital investment of 15 million into Castletownbere, upgrading the harbour, and a 27 million extension to the quay in the harbour, which began last October and will be substantially completed this year. So a very substantial financial investment in that key port in the southwest. On the specific issue that the Deputy raises, this year is the first full year of the implementation of the discards ban under the Common Fisheries Policy, where the practice of discarding juvenile fish will end at sea will end. It's a very significant sustainability measure which will result in benefits to the marine environment and to fishermen alike, securing stocks into the future. The application of the landing obligation or discards ban for all Irish stocks in 2019, coupled with a move towards fishing at maximum sustainable yields levels, are very positive developments for fishermen and the broader goal of sustainability. To implement the landing obligation, Minister Creed announced a quota balancing policy at the end of 2017, and this policy particularly applies to mackerel. The policy was introduced to ensure equitable opportunities for fishermen who stay within the catch limits where others exceed them. Preliminary data provided for mackerel vessels for 2018 landings indicated that some vessel landings were in excess of their catch limit, and it was agreed that initial 2019 allocations would be restricted to a lower level to allow for quota balancing. So essentially those who overfished in 2018 have their reduction reduced in 2019, which is only fair.
1 minute, Deputy Healy-Rae.
Taoiseach, first of all, I don't doubt the efforts that are being made by the government with regard to the negotiations, and I appreciate the work that is being done by everybody involved. But there is an unfair distribution of the quota, and it also makes it so much harder on the smaller operators. The 29 vessels, which have 87% of the national quota, do not have as much at stake as the remaining vessels with only 13% of the national quota. A full year's quota for the Tier 2 vessel in mackerel is a mere 124 tonnes, whereas the larger Killybegs vessels have over 4,000 tonnes of mackerel per vessel. Now, I don't begrudge the people in Killybegs anything. The more they'd have, the better. But I want to see balance, and I want to see the smaller operators, the people who have borrowed $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million and $4 million to buy a boat. That's their employment. They're trying to pay massive sums of money every month back to the bank. They're trying to keep their own families in employment. They're trying to keep a couple of jobs going in their community. And I'm pleading with you that what is facing those people at present is extinction out of that business. They will have to sell their boats. They will have to come onto land and give up the tradition that they've had all their lives. And I think that is so sad, and I'm asking you to please look at this imbalance that is there and try and do something to rectify it, please.
Taoiseach's 1 minute.
Thanks, Deputy. I know this is a serious issue and one of real concern to the Deputy, and I know he'll have an opportunity to speak to Minister Creed about it directly as well. There is a judicial review in the courts, particularly relating to the mackerel issue, and given that it's before the courts, it's probably inadvisable for me to make any comment on it. But what I can say is that the system is designed to ensure that those who overfish 1 year have their quota reduced the next year, and that is only fair. It's only fair on the people who stick to their quota, that those who don't should not be rewarded. We've also brought about a change to give smaller boats, those boats under 18 metres, exclusive access to our inshore waters. That's 6 nautical mile limit, and that's a particular benefit to smaller vessels. And as well as that, you'll be aware of the Clean Ocean Initiative, which Minister Creed is championing to encourage and assist our fishermen to remove plastics from the sea and reduce plastic weight as well, which I think is a real benefit.